Today we're going to talk about your project Void.net that you submitted to the recent Coliseum hackathon, the Solana based hackathon that runs every few months. Welcome to the show, and would love for you to introduce yourself and just a bit about Void.net.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'll just jump right into it. Avoid.net is envisioned as a Wikipedia for advice about things that we should avoid and how we can avoid them. For the purposes of our MVP and the hackathon, we focused in on crypto scams, because if you've been around the space long enough, either you or just about everyone that you know has at some point fallen to a rug pull, a wallet drainer, a project that promised one thing and didn't. And we think of this as a bit of a reputation layer so that we can learn from each other's mistakes, that we can crowdsource intelligence from the wisdom of the people who have been around a lot and learn things the hard way, and kind of create like a directory of danger so that people are aware of the things that they should avoid and how they can go about not learning the hard way and instead learn the easy way by benefiting from other people's experience. Yeah, so within our MVP, there are, I think, two interesting innovations that we have been implementing and kind of leaning on. The first one is based a little bit on Marshall McLuhan. So Marshall McLuhan had a famous saying of the medium is the message. And in our system, the web page is the warning. And so by using the URL avoid.net/term, you can basically create a very easy to communicate warning that allows people to understand exactly what they're getting before they click. And this allows for kind of like a viral by design sort of idea. And one of the problems that we were looking to solve with this particular innovation is warnings absolutely exist in crypto and around the web, but they can be difficult to find. And when they happen, they might happen in a Twitter thread or in a closed Telegram group. And so what we're aiming to do is create a more kind of permanent layer for that warning to exist at. Like avoid.net/FTX tells you all the reasons why you might want to have taken your money off that exchange before things happened. And yeah, these warnings are kind of siloed and very transparent in the existing kind of information ecosystem that we exist within. And our goal is to create a more centralized, crowdsourced place where there's like a permanent address for this information, and it's very easy to communicate and share so that it can reach more people more quickly instead of, having to scroll back through many pages of Twitter accounts or being within a kind of closed group that not everyone has access to.
Mm-hmm. So just to if somebody sees that there is an avoid.net/FTX, the fact that even exists is signal to them that this is something that, and then they can go into it and they can see why and all of that. But just seeing that it exists is a way for them to say, oh, there's something not quite right about this project.
Yes. However, I would also caveat that just because there's a page on the site doesn't necessarily only mean that it's bad and that it should be avoided. Not everyone should avoid the same things, and sometimes there are different reasons for avoiding things. So, for example, one experiment that we ran within the hackathon, there was some controversy recently with an exchange called Titan on Solana. And they were accused by some of their competitors of not fully representing some of the quotes that they were showing. And so we created a page about this controversy. We took information from both sides and created a neutral page that explains it. But I'm not trying to say avoid Titan Exchange. I'm just saying that there is FUD within the space and there is unresolved conflict. And to understand exactly what that is would be more helpful than just kind of believing the FUD and believing the hype. And so it's not only the case that the pages on the website are entirely concrete warnings. Sometimes it's avoid if, and then we would list the details of why you might want to avoid, but maybe some other people do want to ape into a particular project. Or the other kind of situation would be understanding existing controversy and allowing people a more neutral perspective. But that experiment with Titan, it's more kind of the case that using Titan actually allows you to avoid paying more fees. And this was like in no means us trying to bud tighten or say that they're doing bad things. It's more just about embracing controversy, leaning into it, allowing it to be more objectively or concretely explained. So it's not only the case that only
Hmm.
bad things would be in there. I mean, another example that I've kind of thought about this from is like reverse psychology, and that sometimes you might want to create an avoid page for things that help you. So like if, for example, there was a page for Ledger that would help you avoid scams, for example. And so it's not only the case that everything will always be bad, it's just a shorthand way of creating a repository of information so that people can kind of cut through the FUD in a more effective and efficient way than if something like this didn't exist.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. And so this kind of plays into the broader concept of like the tokenization of everything. And it's like the tokenization of Wikipedia into a way where you are economically incentivized to, be as accurate and truth seeking as possible on this platform because you are staking your soul on the platform. What brought about the kind of connection from the original version of it, which you've described, that is like 20-year-old project, and then integrating it with like the tokenomics that are gonna make it potentially like a lot more feasible for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to provide a little bit of context, this concept for the platform was initially kind of conceived in 2005. And then in 2007, I found two developers who were really interested in helping me bring it to life. And they did a build of a media wiki site and kind of unleashed the platform and set me loose to start to compile content and use the wiki. However, because the website itself was so SEO or like optimized, a bunch of spam bots were using it to try and sell drugs and sex online. And that created a bunch of just headaches that I had to kind of go in and curate and moderate the site quite extensively, and things would come back very quickly. And then ultimately, the use of like robots and spam bots posting to the site ended up taking the site down. And the two devs who built it had kind of provided it in a very short sprint and provided it as is, but they weren't able to like fully commit to maintaining it and building it throughout that time. And so effectively this led to me like losing access to the platform. And as a non-technical person, didn't really have the capability of resurrecting it myself. Otherwise I would have a long time ago. And I ended up going on to other things and working for an online community for the last 15 years. But in order to learn from that mistake and to try and innovate around that, we deployed for the purposes of the hackathon what I call a truth escrow, or a triple filter in terms of how information gets placed on the platform. And I'll describe it quickly in terms of what we're building. It's not fully implemented yet because I was experimenting and have worked on this platform through some vibe coding for about 2 weeks. And this is like my first ever vibe code experiment. And this was
Nice.
a really good learning in how difficult smart contracts can be. But we'll get a little bit in terms of what has happened since there, because it's evolved and there's potentially some other people who are going to get involved and help me kind of realize this at scale. But I'll describe this truth escrow kind of mechanic first. And so the idea is that there's 3 layers of verification for the information that goes on the site. And the first layer is AI that just kind of filters out hate speech or malicious speech or things that are obvious spam. That's also not in our MVP, but is what we're aiming to build very shortly. Then the second layer is this decentralized community verification and validation. And so what this involves is basically you need to get 3 people or 3 wallets to escrow or back up the information with a very small amount of crypto. And we've played around with a couple of different ideas. My original concept was that it should be 2 cents, like adding your 2 cents to a concept.
Hmm.
But then I've also been playing around with different meme numbers, like repeating 3s, repeating 7s, repeating 69s, all those types of concepts. Like it's a very small amount of crypto. It should be less than $1 or less than 10 cents. And you need to get 3 people to say, that's a good idea. I will back it with some crypto.
Hmm.
And then the third layer after it's kind of received that both economic and social validation by the community is an admin review. And this is to make sure that there's no legal problems and that it's kind of like a final check just before things go super live to the site and aren't going to create a bunch of legal issues. Currently, that admin review is centralized with just me, but ultimately, as the community evolves, we would like that almost to be kind of like an editorial board in terms of information that comes in and then gets validated, and then just one final check to make sure that it's good or that the references are properly sourced, so that the information on the site is fully, well, not fully, but trustable, and that it's not just anyone posting anything. And part of this reasoning around creating these barriers is that the URL is so potent and so powerful that we don't just want it to be a free-for-all where anyone can post anything. And so it is like Wikipedia with a couple of extra steps currently, but we felt like that was a good experiment for the purposes of the hackathon and the MVP, but also it represents a series of checks and balances so that people aren't putting unvalidated warnings, budding projects without any like reason to, or targeting people without proper due diligence, because we've seen how this can be misused, and we feel like it's very important to be responsible with technology and not just unleash it into the world, especially when that has happened before and it led to some problems. It's kind of almost about an iterative experimental approach to learn from the mistakes that have happened before in the previous experiments and to try new things to remain nimble.
Yeah, it's a really interesting UX. And I guess another question I would have for this is like you kind of in a way compete with something like Polymarket, because the truth is sometimes it's not subjective, but it can like change as there is more clarity. And I think a lot of reason that people like love Polymarket is that you kind of see that graph of the truth of something resolving, and then everything is like, people are betting on it moment to moment, and the odds are kind of like revealing what the outcome actually is. But then you also have like UMA in the background, where you have this giant cohort of people arguing extensively back and forth, and this like very big mechanism there. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that as a consensus truth-seeking mechanism for, because even they could come out and say, okay, like we're now also making bets on if this project is going to be a fraud, or if this project is going to cause problems, or like they actually can fill the role of consumer protection. So like, do you see Avoid.net as something that integrates with them, provides like a different layer of information, or how do you kind of see that?
Yeah. And so the layering in of prediction markets on top of this system is in the current roadmap and in the concept. And this is something that we received feedback during the hackathon sprint from multi-chain advisors that this would be a really interesting mechanic that would help make the project more exciting, more marketable, more rewarding for the audience. And so the way that we see these two concepts coming together, they both involve kind of economic validation of evidence in the current kind of truth escrow model. But in the future, the way that we're thinking about this is it's like the presentation of evidence and then wagering on the outcomes of that evidence, where Polymarket and Kalshi as examples of prediction markets, they generally just kind of pose the question and then ask you to wager on it. But what if there was also this evolving crowdsourced information layer where it's not just, will this happen, yes or no? It's, here's some evidence that we found, and maybe as that evidence stacks up and gets kind of curated and added by the community, that changes the perception within the market, both the perception and the reality of whether or not a project, for example, will succeed. And so a way that this could work is, let's imagine that there's a project that's going to launch in a month or two. And the project has behind it a couple of people who are bad actors in the space and have a history of rugging their projects. If people were able to kind of crowdsource their intelligence and say, hey, by the way, like just before we ape into this project, we should know who's behind it. Maybe they also do an analysis on the tokenomics. They look at the series of wallets. Like now we're looking into like as it launches, there would be a bunch of hype, but then as the project continues, people can actually like look on chain and bring on chain analysis to say which wallets hold this token. Are there security elements or are there potential somewhat questionable technical things going on? And like it's kind of a way where we're currently in the space very much encouraged to do our own research. But what if we could pool all that research together, benefit from what other people have said, but also potentially wager on the outcomes as the evidence kind of comes in? And we see this almost just as a information layer, a bit of a reputation layer as well that deserves to exist within this space. And hopefully it makes things a little bit more interesting, and that it also doesn't become kind of just a negative spiral of FUD, because we want to really be objective and constructive, but also to make sure that the space remains safe and that people who are taking advantage of other folks aren't just able to do so again and again and again. And people learn the hard way by losing significant amounts of money, because that's really bad for our space as well. And people who come into the space and fall a victim to grift are less likely to continue. And we just hope that this is able to provide some constructive, helpful advice so that people don't lose all their capital.
Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. I hope I hope it goes really well. I hope you hear really good things back from the hackathon. I've spoken to MCA about some stuff as well. They're very, very helpful, sharp guys in terms of knowing the space. I'd like to learn a bit more about yourself and your background and kind of what brought you into crypto, what brought you into this kind of realm of consumer protection, and if you wouldn't mind going into that a bit.
Yeah, so the idea kind of came when I was like a teenager, and I was at a party in rural New Brunswick staring at the moon, and the general concept that I had was, wouldn't it be interesting if we could get and like crowdsource and bring together different people's experiences of consumer products? Because currently the way that we find out about consumer products is through advertising, and that's very much one-sided. It's a pay-to-play experience, and it doesn't necessarily reflect like, is the product any good actually? How is that product made? Are there environmental or like, are the workers being treated well? All of these things are externalities, and then companies are able to kind of gloss over them with their advertising campaigns. And at the time, I was very much into a bit of, I had a rebellious spirit. I was reading Adbusters, which was like a zine in Canada that was all about like anti-capitalism. And I saw this kind of as a feedback loop for misleading advertising, and also to kind of connect the dots between which companies own which brands and what's going on here. And one of the problems that I was trying to solve with this is that my mom keeps buying things that suck. And I wanted to make it very easy and apparent so that she could easily find out which companies had done what things and which brands were not good. And so the original iteration of this was around kind of exposing corporate misinformation. And
interesting.
Yeah. And
so this is something that you've been working on for like your whole life.
Well, I mean, I didn't actively work on it between the time that it came down and
not actively
now.
But like it was something that you have been thinking about since you were a teenager.
Yeah
That's
and
really cool.
To like I thought through and understood that in order for it to really take off. So actually, first, before I back up, the original platform that we launched in 2007 after I kind of thought about it randomly in 2005 was it reached 66,000 people and had 200 pages of content before it came down. And then in order to fully realize and evolve the platform, I understood that this really needed a global distributed community to bring it to where it should be, to scale it to the point where it would have a very robust, differentiated perspective kind of all coming together and being synthesized. And so after this platform, I was on a youth program called Katimovic and traveling around the country. After that finished, I ended up studying semiotics, sociology, and the environment in post-secondary. And then I also went to go and work for a social network for social change because I wanted to understand how online communities work, how to align incentives to get people to cooperate, and ended up basically working for that NGO that connected young people who wanted to change the world for about 15 or 16 years, leading up to a couple of years ago. And at that point, I wanted to get my hands into kind of Claude code and vibe coding. But I've also always been very curious about technology, especially when something is created and we can kind of like pivot it and use it in a different way than it was intended for. I find those unintended consequences really fascinating because the way that we can all take ideas and then add a little something or twist a certain element of it can often lead to very innovative results. And so I've always been kind of dabbling in different things, and I'm very curious about how technology works and how it can work in a slightly different way than how it was thought about. I ended up getting involved in crypto in about 2019. There was like a family friend who like onboarded me and like talked me through the whole process of seed phrases and wallets and like reading through the Bitcoin white paper and kind of getting my feet wet. I was also super interested in the ways that different chains acted as networks and as communities that amplified each other. And me and one of my friends from university thought that it would be really interesting to try and build an NFT project that kind of broke a bunch of the rules of how NFTs worked. And so we wanted to create NFTs as Valentine's Day cards that are not meant to be like...
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So we had the idea that like the way that NFTs were currently thought about, or at the time and maybe still, is they're kind of like Picassos or profile pictures, things that people kind of have as art pieces that they hold on their walls and that are kind of seen as super valuable, or things that are hoped to be seen as super valuable. And we thought it would be interesting if we could spread love on chain and create this kind of permanent, immutable record of good vibes and love, whether it was romantic or more like friendship based things, and also like crypto puns. And so we created a whole series of Valentine's Day cards, some of which are kind of romantic and some of which are funny, like Ape Into My Love, all these types of things. And we were working on a different chain that had much cheaper gas than Ethereum, still not as cheap as Solana. And we originally received a quote of like $1,500 to create a minting contract that would allow us to like mint our own NFTs. And then during the kind of week when we were looking at this and moving forward with that, one of the NFT marketplaces on the chain that we used built their own kind of like do-it-yourself minting contract. And so instead of $1,500, it was now like $80 to do. And this feeling of like having a vision, knowing what we wanted to do, but then like the road is being built as we're traveling on it. And that's a very exciting feeling where like we felt like we were just a little bit ahead of our time at that time. And then by the time we got to the point that we wanted to mint, the infrastructure had caught up with the opportunity. And then we experienced a whole bunch of success with the actual NFTs. There was like, they were associated and affiliated with another airdrop on the platform that was very hyped. We ended up being like the third biggest NFT traded on the platform over a 24-hour period, and like vastly exceeded our own expectations, which again, we were just experimenting. We were like, a couple of young people being like, wouldn't it be funny if people could send Valentine's Day cards on chain? And then we did, and it like became very, very popular for a brief moment in time. And then fast forward a couple of months, I had another contact who was working on a project on Solana, and this was around the kind of like Chad's ethos. And so now I'm talking about Chads.wtf. And at the time, I had a bunch of experience with online communities. I had minted my own NFT project, and so I was invited to basically join the Chads. I like to think too that the founders and the group just saw what a Chad I was and was like, this guy fully embodies the Chad ethos. We need him on the team. And so while they had been working on that project for about a year, up until that point, I was invited to join still about 6 months before launch. And that project has also done incredibly well, and I think exceeded a lot of our expectations and really worked its way into like meme culture on Solana. And we are very well connected with a bunch of the like really big names across the crypto space. Our team is also like a very high performing, very smart, very well connected group of guys. And we also just like really enjoy working with each other. And I feel like that vibe and the connection kind of like really holds the project together in a way that a lot of other projects, like the founders might not know who each other are. Whereas like have known each other for a very long time. We've worked together. We've delivered excellence together. We hang out together. And all of those things really provide a very strong foundation for community and technology to thrive.
That's an incredible story. That is just such an awesome story. Wow. Where to begin? I guess like the key theme that I really like there is like your curiosity and kind of like play, like you guys were playing and like that play led to, like this massive opportunity that kind of came out from that. That's just like so great.
And I feel like preparation is rewarded in the space, like, but also so is play. And when you bring joy and experimentation and curiosity instead of like, yes, we have conviction in what we're doing, but it's also a lot of fun. And that fun and not taking yourself too seriously and being prepared to learn and pivot and experiment, those values really lend itself to the space because things move so fast. The innovation and the pace of things is incredible. But if you were unwilling to change in the light of new evidence as it comes to light, you're probably going to miss a bunch of things. And so just like experimenting, playing as well. Like when the hard work feels like play, it's way less tedious. The two things that I focus on are both curiosity and helping other people. Those two and play. Where if I'm working really hard and I don't feel like it's going to benefit others, and it also doesn't feel fun and experimental, then I start to question myself, and also just the work feels way more arduous. Where I'm very happy to work if I know that I'm going to help someone, or if I'm kind of experimenting and seeing if it will work, as opposed to working hard without knowing what the result will be. And we never really can know, but treating things as an experiment is a bit of a cheat code as well.
Yeah, that's sort of like a bounded experiment where you're like, I'm not committing my entire life to these Valentine's cards. I'm just kind of having fun and going to see. And then it's like, you don't really see where that leads, but maybe even if you were able to see the future and know that it would lead to that outcome, it would make it harder to actually start doing it. Because now you feel like you're working towards this outcome that feels potentially like very far and tedious.
Yeah. And then like there's constant surprise and joy when there are outcomes that you didn't expect to happen. And like within that V-Cards NFT project, like a lot of NFT projects kind of have one template and then they change out a bunch of variables, where we were running it in like experiments within experiments. So we like had 4 different types that we were doing. Some of them were animals. Some of them were random pictures that had been taken across a bunch of travels. Some of them were pictures of fireworks. Like we kind of each subset, which we called first base, second base, third base, and fourth base, because like following that kind of like linear romantic kind of way of doing things, just experiments on experiments. And when you don't know what's going to work, pick a bunch of things, do like A/B testing, or try a bunch of things and see what works. And then we know that not everything will work. But when it's a fun experiment, then you're excited to see what the results will be. And even if it fails, it's like, wow, I learned a lot from that. And now we can move on and try something else that works or doesn't, depending on how it goes.
Right. And how many people did you work with on this? Like, how big was the team?
For which project?
I guess for the Valentine's cards.
Me and one other contact who I met in post-secondary and is an intellectual property lawyer. And actually, he's also involved in the Avoid.net project because I know that there are a bunch of legal ramifications with
Yes.
this. So having someone that you know and that you trust and has a legal background and can kind of advise and direct what you can say, what you can't say, how things should work, and like how to decentralize risk and all these sorts of things is incredibly valuable. Because otherwise I'd be kind of feeling around in the dark and potentially getting into areas that are legally potentially questionable. Yeah, it's been lovely to be able to go on these journeys with people that are really smart in ways that are different than my own intelligence and experience, and that are really fun to go down this road on. Like experimenting in crypto, like not everyone that I know IRL is as into on-chain stuff as myself. And so
Yes.
some of the time it almost feels like we're speaking this very specialized language, and that like other people around me who might be overhearing calls that I'm on are just have no idea what I'm talking about because it's so specialized. And just having someone who you've known for a decade or two that is also experimenting and also kind of figuring things out, and it makes it way more exciting and interesting because you can kind of get a second opinion. And when something unexpected happens, you can like marvel at that, or you can determine what to do if you really need to put out some fires very quickly together in a more cohesive way than if it was just one person trying to figure things out by themselves.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I've found that a lot myself this year where usually I like to build things. I love tinkering and building things, but when I do it for myself, it sort of becomes this like narrow path. But the second I am collaborating with someone and doing it with someone, it's like everything opens up, and things that feel like when things start to feel constrictive, it can actually just open up instead. And it's like, oh, why don't we try this idea, or like, dive into this side of it. And I find that it's very generative to work with other people on things like that.
I have a background as well in improvisation. And so like the concept of yes and bouncing ideas off of people and creating things that are bigger than what you could do by yourself is also just incredibly rewarding, and also allows for like routing around problems when you get stuck much easier because you can have two perspectives and you can figure out multiple paths and figure out what's going to work.
Yeah, and I think we almost take for granted in crypto how new and kind of ever changing it all is. And, we're sort of know we're building towards some sort of future where it is this dominant thing. Maybe it's already there, arguably. But I think we almost take for granted that it is like this like evolving and changing field where most jobs and most careers are not really like that anymore. It's like a very stable, like if you go into an office, you're kind of doing the same thing every day. Whereas in crypto, it's like, okay, now we have NFTs, now we have agents, and now it's the prediction market super cycle.
Yeah.
So
who knows what will be
kind
next?
of exciting. Yeah, exactly. And maybe what's next is, truth markets for, community backed warnings with economic stakes. And things like that developing. Okay, this has been really, really great. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been really fascinating hearing your story, hearing your history. I'm definitely going to be following up now on this and just seeing what happens. I'll be if I come across things on Twitter that look sketchy,
Yes.
I'll see about putting a void.net URL on it, or staking some Solana warning on it. And yeah, thanks, Chad.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been great to chat with you. And we're really excited about kind of bringing this community to life. And for people listening, if you either A, have things to warn people about, or B, want to get further involved in the idea, we're very, very interested in welcoming people and building community and building really cool things that help people. And we're like the first 100 users of this program before we go to mainnet are really going to shape this idea. And so if you like the vibe and think you have some things to contribute, we're very, very open to hearing from you. And the website, avoid.net, is a really good place to kind of check it out, see if it resonates. And if it does, we hope you get involved.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.